The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Planted with Sara Pyan. I'm Sara Pyan, your host, and today we have a very special guest, Seth Yakatan. Hey, Seth, if you have ever been on LinkedIn and you're in the cannabis industry, you have seen Seth's posts, his insights. I'm really excited to have him on today. Seth,
I'm here for it. Thank you so much.
absolutely.
I appreciate
So, question I like to ask my guests, what was your first cannabis experience?
it. Well, I went to school in Denver, Colorado at the University of Denver, and we used to say that you couldn't spell drugs without DU. And my first experience was my sophomore year of college. I grew up in the household of a guy who was a very stern disciplinarian. So I really don't think I drank my first beer till like the summer after my high school year. And I was also very young. So my sophomore year of college, I smoked weed for the first time, and it was just an incredible experience. Um, that was it.
That was
I
it.
think I smoked weed every day after that until I was about 26. So it was good.
Right on. And I'm sure the people who follow you know this, but you've done a lot of work in life sciences and with a lot of different companies. What made you do the move into cannabis? Because you were a very early adapter in the industry, like before we were even having conversations about legalization.
Yeah. You know, I'm friends with a lot of people in the industry, and I like to give a lot of people credit. And Wes from Heavy Hitters was in a meeting with me about 2 years ago, and he said the most powerful law in the universe is the law of unintended consequences. And that's precisely how I got into cannabis. So I was really focused on helping therapeutic drug development companies become successful. And in 2008, I got involved in a company which ended up effectively going public on NASDAQ, and with nothing to do with me in the next 15 months, did exceptionally well. I think in 2011, it was the best performing or the second best performing stock on NASDAQ. And about that same time, there was a private company in the US that I merged into a public company in Australia with a bunch of money in it. And that company did successfully well for a couple of years until it crashed. So I was coming off of these two deals that looked like I was some kind of genius from that I really didn't have anything to do with the geniusing of. And I got a call one day in December of 2011 from some really unfriendly investors that effectively said, hey, we think recreational cannabis is going to occur in Canada, and we know how to do reverse mergers and pump and dumps and manipulate stock. And we think that there's this company called GW Pharmaceuticals, which is really cool. And we want to clone it, and we want to go raise a bunch of money for a story around the therapeutic drug in cannabis. Go and do that. So originally I got hired by these four guys because they wanted me to do the due diligence on the deal that they were doing. And I called the guy, and he doesn't like me anymore. I don't know why. His name's Chuck Arnold. And Chuck had sent me a bunch of money, and I said, Chuck, I got to send you the money back. And he was like, why? And I was like, because this project is so bad. Like, I don't have to do any diligence on it. Like, you cannot do this. And he said to me, like, okay, well, what would you do? And I was like, well, you didn't pay me to tell you what I would do. And I spent probably 3 months trying to figure out how I would do something. And I sent them a deck, and they were all in Florida, and they said, come to Florida. And we sat around a lunch table with a bunch of kosher shawarma And I told him what I wanted to do. And literally one of the guys goes like this. He goes, here's $250,000. And the other three guys are going to wire you $250,000. Go start the company tomorrow. And that was how I started a company called Calaterra Therapeutics. And what I did was I licensed 3 small molecules from Raphael Mechoulam and the Hebrew University at Jerusalem in order to try and start. And I did start, the second or third therapeutic drug development company focused on, endocannabinoid system modulation. I
Wow.
raised a bunch of money for it and took it public and didn't really work out exactly the way I wanted it to. But that's really what led me into cannabis. And it was nothing that I had ever intended to do.
What made you stay? Because it's a crazy ass industry.
In therapeutic drug development, until you get your drug into about 60 or 70 people and prove that it works, and that could take 2 to 7 years and cost you anywhere between 50 and $300 million. You don't have anything, right? You have hope. And raising money for that and selling those stories to pharmaceutical companies, I had done pretty successfully 6 or 7 times, and I got tired of it. And when I started to look at cannabis from a therapeutic drug development perspective, I really became interested in the power of the medicinal benefits of the plant. I spent a lot of time in Israel with Mechoulam and his predecessor, a guy named Yosef or Yossi Tam, and another guy who people know named David or Dedi Mieri. And a lot of the work that has come out of a lot of the medical centers there, it's a second story that I didn't get into, where I did another company doing the same thing that had funded, 6 or 7 clinical trials in Israel using cannabis. I really got fascinated by it. And because I had effectively taken so many early stage deals that didn't really have anything with them and successfully monetized them with pharma, I said to myself, I'm smarter than Bruce Linton. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that $7 pre-roll that we're selling at a dispensary, and I'm going to turn it into a $75 pre-roll that you have to get a prescription for. I'm like, I'm smart enough to do that. So that's why I stuck around. And that failed 3 times until I made the foray into consumer cannabis, which was in 2019. So I guess I stuck around because I was convinced that someone was going to figure out how to harness the medicinal power of the plant in a patent protected, FDA approved regulatory environment and take a product which is otherwise a commoditized consumer product and turn it into a high value pharma product. Again, I tried that 3 times and failed all 3 times. So
Do you think that it's still a possibility, or are you like, no, I've tried it, it's not going to happen?
it's definitely a possibility. I think when you look at the intersection of knowledge and technology and distribution, I see a future state where I'm 53, 54. So I see a future state where my child's child in 50 years could probably walk into a CVS and spit in a cup and take a PCR-based saliva test and find out everything that's going on with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then and I've seen this product, a 28 or a 36 well inkjet printer with a bunch of different cannabinoids in it, where it spits out a tincture that's specifically designed for you. So if you try and thread the needle of biopharmaceutical business models and intellectual property white space that exists around cannabis and the amount of funding, or cannabinoids, and the amount of funding that's available for biopharmaceutical or small molecule drug development, I don't know that you're going to see another GW Pharma, but I do think that at some point you will see, somewhere you're at with a sports nutrition kind of market in terms of its utilization. And I do think there's a future state where you could find uh, cannabinoids or molecules that modulate the endogenous cannabinoid system that have clinical utility and value. I do think it will be difficult to get there because of the power and size of the rec market. And we could talk about how I got into the rec market.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about some of the fallacies that come along with the rec market. Because here in California, I started in the 215 days when we were working with patients. And, when I started, I was a year out of chemo. And I was part of my healing process was being able to help people navigate that menu and get relief. It was very healing for me, and it was also part of my growth as an educator and what had me go on to work with researchers and other scientists in the cannabis realm. Um, but when we got into recreational, one of the things I would hear when I was co-chair of the legalization children, this is just a pot fest. And then we got into legalization. And the thing that I noticed more than anything else was that it was very much the opposite of that. We were actually seeing more people that were coming in. They were curious about using it for general wellness or the medicinal benefits and felt like they were safe to do that because they did not want to have that conversation with their physician to get the recommendation. That term, like I come from a family of healthcare practitioners, so the term drug seeking behavior is something that my mother used to bring up a lot. And there were a lot of people who were nervous about asking for recommendations that they would get branded with that. So we were seeing a lot of people saying, hey, now that I can have access to it, how will it help me with sleep or anxiety or discomfort? And I feel like in a lot of ways when we're looking at the rec market, when we see these people who are like cannabis sells itself, and then they're like, well, what happened? My sales aren't what I thought they were going to be. They're missing out on this huge untapped swath of the market that may have been looking to get high, or at least they don't think that they're interested in the euphoric effects initially, but they are looking for access to alternative wellness. This episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
There's a deep question there, and I'm not that smart. So maybe you can just specifically, as a result of that, ask me the question. Do you think? And so, what is the question, if there is one, or is it a discussion?
I think it's more of a discussion, Seth. It's more of a, why? Okay, why are people such blockheads when they come into cannabis and they don't understand how nuanced it is, and they want it to be so cut and dry? Like, it's about the stoners. It's about the high octane products, and that's
It's
when they're getting like the celebrities coming in with their
it's
stuff.
it's because there's two things that I think there's three things that constrain. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The first is that fundamentally the industry doesn't operate like an industry. It operates like a collection of nation states that have two limbs tied behind their back. Okay. So, when we talk about how someone online, and I would love to give him the attribution, posted the other day, there's a $32 billion industry. The cannabis made more than the NFL and the NBA and Major League Baseball and the National Hockey League. So you've got something, right? It's an industry, but it doesn't function that way because of the federal illegalness of it. And so the fundamental constraint is that it's difficult for anybody who operates a business to really be successful. Okay. I think you then have this stigmatization, and whether you want to call it multi-generational stigmatization, religious socioeconomic stigmatization, politicized stigmatization, for whatever reason, you have 3 or 4 generations of human beings who have been conditioned to believe that this is an evil thing and utilizing it is going to cause you to become worse. We could say the same thing about the food that we eat and the alcohol that we drink and the pornography that no one looks at.
Yeah.
The final thing, which I think is the most difficult, okay, is QA/QC. I'm drinking a can of Perrier Maison Peach. You know what? If I drink this can in Los Angeles, California, or in Cleveland, Ohio, or in Tallahassee, Florida, or in Nova Scotia, Halifax, British Columbia, wherever the hell that is, it better look, feel, and taste the same. But boy, if I do that with cannabis, it does not work that way. And when I first came into the industry, there was a company that I was looking really hard at called Mary's Medicinals. And they had a patch that people swore by until it stopped working. So I think the biggest, so if you have a fundamental industry which is difficult to operate in, as many industries are, this is harder. And if you have this socioeconomic perceived stigmatization that you have to break through, that you're either going to accept it or you're not going to accept it. And if you're not going to accept it, you either have to be convinced to accept it or you're never going to accept it, right? I think the biggest issue is that you do not have a lot of consistent QC, QA in the product set that's delivered to customer because you're dealing with a variable economic product. That's also complicated by the fact that it's going to affect every patient differently every time they use it and how they dose it. I don't have a bottle of Tylenol, I can get one, right? Why is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory or an acetaminophen a great product? Because it's the same every single time you take it everywhere in the world. It's exactly the same. So if I have a headache and I'm in New York City and I go to CVS and I buy Advil, I know what I'm getting.
Right.
If I go to New York and I go into a dispensary and I buy a product like cookies that might or might not be on shelf, and I try and buy that in New York or in Florida or in Oakland or in New Mexico, it's a different freaking product. So if I buy Gary Payton in the same bag and I get a different effect out of it every time, or I don't have a quality experience, there's no way to ubiquitize that. And until you find a way to alleviate that or alleviate one of those three constraints, you're going to be bound by difficulty in a $32 billion industry that's growing 12 times faster than alcohol and 12 times faster than tobacco and 4 times faster than alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, those are facts. I think, the lack of education, the public education that goes on that would drive more successful outcomes, I think is really lacking. I was head of education for the apothecarium dispensaries in California for almost a decade. And one of the things that I looked at was creating a safe container for experimentation for people and actually helping them kind of balance what their expectations were going to be. Because, like you said, we all react differently. And because these are plants, there's always going to be differences in how they show up, not to mention throwing in to the mix. We still deal with people just naming products just to name them. There's whether they're tracking genetic markers of cultivars or not is a whole other thing altogether. But really talking to people about the fact that you have to be more aware of what you're putting in your body and tracking it.
I think that whole point is why beverages are exploding.
Yeah.
What are you and I both doing right now? We're both drinking a beverage.
Yep.
The other thing is that not all, but many beverages are low dose. So when you talk about safety, like what comes to mind is, usually when I have someone who approaches me and says, I've never used cannabis, the first thing that comes to mind for me, if they want to use in some way, shape, or form, is I'm probably going to put them onto a topical first,
Yep.
or I'm probably going to put them onto a low dose, see how this goes. And you can always take more. Because I think the other thing that fuels that, mania or experience is this notion of the green out. Like, again, I'm 54. I have two kids that are 19 and 17. I never heard about a green out until 2 years ago. I don't know what the hell a green out was. A green out just tells me that you don't know how to smoke weed. That's what it
Right.
tells me. But like that's a thing now, right? Like I had so much I couldn't. Okay, well I was just stoned, I guess. I don't know. I mean, maybe the stuff is that much more potent. Big article in the New York Times on Sunday about that. Um, but I think it, it, part of the part of that problem with education is where do you draw the line between somebody who just wants an effect and someone who really wants a medicinal benefit. And I have an amazing girlfriend who I'm going to plug. Her name is Suzanne DeCarian, who has a business called Earth Alchemy Holistic Health, and she's a plant medicine healer, right? And she helps stage 3 and stage 4 and people that are transitioning critical care patients who have no other alternatives to use, cannabinoid medicine to try and alleviate symptomology. And, I think when you approach it from that perspective, um, part of the education is also finding a caring practitioner. Going back to where we started, one of the first people who I ever met in the industry along that therapeutic journey was a woman named Mara Gordon.
Oh, Mara's one of my best friends. I love her.
Oh, that she was doing 10 years ago. Um, and some of the data, and she did a deal and she gave some of her stuff to this company in Canada or in Australia, and the deal may or may not have worked out for her. I think she might have got disillusioned with the commercial side of the business as a result of that. Um, but that was the time that I was out hunting stuff, and man, the kind of things that I saw from her, and the education and the leadership that I saw from her, really underscored, what I felt was the truth around, the power of the plant as medicine. And eh, yeah, I don't want to say that has been undermined by the explosive growth of the industry, but like once you let the genie of the bottle out of the bottle and the commercialization, some of that gets lost. And hopefully we can get it back at some point. I'm not sure how. I do think there are a couple of companies that I watch on the rec side that I think are trying to do that, or at least have formulation capability,
Mm-hmm.
or packaging capability that speak to that. One of the companies I will not stop talking about is a husband and wife team, and the husband's Chris Emerson and his wife, out of the Bay Area with a company called Level Pro Tabs. And if you look at what Levels does, and you look at the way that if you look at the way that that product's packaged, and Chris is a PhD, I believe, in biochemistry from Stanford that worked as Novartis for a couple of years. And when you look at how the product is formulated, and when you look at how it's manufactured, and when you look at the concentrations of rares that he has, that's probably, in my opinion, and I love to be challenged, one of the most medically relevant consumer products on the planet. That although you don't have IP around those formulations, like that stuff should be on the shelf at CVS tomorrow,
Right.
right? So when you look at products like that and they just say sleep or mood or focus or concentration or effect or no anxiety or what recovery, right? Like, I could go and I'm on the board of a public company on NASDAQ that's the uh, largest selling product into GNC franchise, right? We have 30 brands, right? Massive gains, right? So it's the same stuff. So I do think that there's some hope, but you got a lot of broken hearts, I think, and minds that you need to get through in order to win that battle. And as I've told you, privately, that's not what I really do. I vote and I pay taxes and I kind of keep my mouth shut. It's just a lot easier for me because they'd probably just lock me in a cell at this point.
Going back to talking about Chris and Level, he's brilliant. He's brilliant. I've done some talks with him, and I think, it's when we look at like the consumer reports, like the data that comes out about popular products, and Lord knows we've been hearing about gummies for years. You can find gummies in every shape, flavor, and form. I always want to counter it, like with the fact that yeah, we have these modes of use that are very popular, but it's because we haven't had the conversations about the possibilities of other formats like Level. When I was at Apothecarium, it was a product that, for those in the know, was very popular, but other people would be kind of intimidated by, why would I get a tablet? And having programming and conversations with consumers about why it's a valuable tool, and talking about minor cannabinoids and what they do is a huge part of turning people on to experimentation and figuring out what works well for them. And I found this even when I wasn't working in cannabis, but if you ever notice, when a company is in trouble, the first thing they do is they get rid of their marketing department. And I'm always wondering, like, why would you do that? I mean, I know you're trying to cut salaries, but this is like the biggest communicator between you and the audience that you want to purchase your product. What are your thoughts on that?
Depends on the company.
Yeah.
Usually, what you find in a lot of companies, and I've said this a few times, is that you have a misalignment of incentives. What's the best thing for the company, and what's the best thing for the management team, and what's the best thing for the consumer, and what's the best thing for the investor, usually are not aligned. And what happens is that you start to make really hard decisions. I've also said for most CEOs, doing the right thing as a human being is not part of the CEO job description. Because if you have to go lay off 100 people, you could probably come up with 100 better things to do than lay off 100 people.
Yeah.
But that's the job. So, in the business world, altruism and the alignment of incentives do not factor into the equation of how do I get my money back? Because I'm going to tell you this, any investor that you've ever been in front of, unless they are a philanthropist, and there's a few of them, are going to do one thing. They're going to figure out how to screw you out of your company and how to take as much control as they possibly can in order to get their money back and in order to get a return. You want to know why? That's their job.
Well, I mean, that's
We're
straightforward enough.
you going to watch the Super Bowl in 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to watch 50 grown men who get paid an average of $3 million a year to go beat the living shit out of each other for 3 hours so 1 billion people can watch them. And the minute that game's over, you want to know what they're supposed to do? They're supposed to go home and be a normal human being. That's the job. You're not allowed to go home and hit your wife.
Nope.
But boy, you know what your job is? And I was talking to a guy about this the other day. Imagine if the job description of your job is I am going to run full speed in order to let a 300-pound man hit me as hard as he possibly can and get right up and do it again. That's the job. That's the job. So when you look at a lot of these things externally and you're like, why? This is so dumb. Is getting hit in the head 17 times for $3 million for a game? Does that, I don't, it doesn't look fun to me. It looks fun
No.
to watch, right? But like, it's the same thing. So when you ask, like, why do these people do these things? It's because the incentives usually don't align. And if the path of least resistance is follow the money, usually then you figure out, why are you doing this? This doesn't make sense. Oh, it's because we're saving money because these guys want to get their money back.
Right, right. Cannabis is such an emotional and personal thing for most consumers. And there's something to be said about that connection that you make to create the true blue fans that come in. And one thing I've noticed in the cannabis realm is that there are these brands, companies that have these really good connections, have these really thoughtful products. They have the secret sauce, and then they get acquired. And I saw this when I worked in technology as well, though, where a company acquires you, says, "I love your secret sauce, nothing's gonna change," and then 2 years in, boom, and then everything just fails.
So let's demystify that. Why?
Yeah.
The incentives don't align. So let's make an example. Let's make an example. You and I have a very high quality flower brand in California that we love, and it's super high quality indoor premium flower, and they get bought by an MSO. In any other normal industry other than cannabis, the people who sold that company to the MSO eventually are just going to want to ride off into the sunset. So unless you have significant long-term founder buy-in, the ethos that began that company and the QC and the QA and the SOPs and the level of care and the diligence is eventually going to leave. So that's the first reason. Okay. The second reason is, let's say in this company, we all use a very expensive factor input to grow our flower. And the guys at corporate that bought us say, well, we could save 3% on $20 million if we switch to this other thing. Well, that's $600,000 a year. It's a lot of money. So we switch, and the quality goes down and the yield goes down, because the incentive isn't about how do I preserve everything that's going on that made the company great. The incentive is, how do I make more money?
Even if it's short term, turn and burn.
Think about it. Think about the stock market. Think about the way that capital markets are driven. Think about the way that companies are valued. All of them, whether they're cannabis, whether they're automotive, whether they're oil, whether they're AI, whether they're chip manufacturers, are driven off of an assumption of constant growth. Not growth, constant. Intelligent, very early investor in NVIDIA. So his personal net worth dropped by 20% over the weekend on a press release from China. Not data, not illustration, not fact, because you didn't hear that they spent $1.2 billion on chips. A press release from China, because the constant growth of NVIDIA and the hegemony and the dominance of them looked like it might not be that way anymore. Right? So if you look at the way that, just forget about cannabis, the market is driven, the rest of the world catches a cold because it's built upon this assumption of constant growth. And because of that, the foundational aspects that exist when you and I are sitting around a dinner table and saying, gosh, this product would be amazing and it would help so many people. And it doesn't really matter what ingredients we're going to use because we want it to be benefit. That gets washed out over time when the corporate objective, is maximization of profit, maximization of value. Losing money? I haven't.
Nope.
So it's not just the industry, it's the overall conditioning of the way that fundamental markets have been built. And guess what? Those markets have been built for 400 or 500 years. Go back and look at why European powers expanded and colonized the world. They wanted to make more money. at any price. 100 years ago, we did that with human beings.
Right. Right. No, I mean that makes
100 on the line. That's what it comes down to. And the value proposition and the level of care that you have when you're starting something, once it gets to a point, it can be preserved. Look at Patagonia.
mm-hmm.
Look at Ben & Jerry's. Look at REI. It can be preserved, but it's the way that the market conditions business.
Do you think that that's why we're seeing a lot of people coming into the C-suite that have absolutely no experience in cannabis because they're just looking at what they've done in other companies and they think it's applicable?
I think that's what a lot of the investors think. I also think that I've on LinkedIn talked about a lot of companies, and many of those companies are founded by people that I wouldn't say have significant professional management experience, even inside of cannabis. So when you're in an emerging industry where there's not a template, it's hard. When you look at the models that MSOs have underwritten, to get someone who knows how to manage retail locations, or to get someone who knows how to manage supply chain, or to get someone who knows how to manage logistics, probably looks like a good idea. We talked recently about a post that I put up on the new CEO of Canopy, who doesn't seem to have a modicum of understanding of anything related to these businesses. So why does that person get appointed the CEO who used to run a furniture store? Because he looks good on paper. Because if you run a 10,000 person organization and you've grown it and you've delivered returns and you know how to run a business, I guess people think, well, they'll figure out how to run this business. Now, he turned this piece of shit around, he can turn the next piece of shit around. I think what a lot of people don't understand is that the constraints that bind cannabis are 100 times harder than the constraints that bind any other business that I've ever seen. And unless you really, really are passionate about it, or unless you really believe in the end game, stay out. Go be an advertising person. Go run a bathing suit company. Go stay in beverage. Stay out. It's just too hard. And I think almost every single person that I've seen come in, who's done that. I'm not going to say everyone, but at a high level in the C-suite, they failed. And I can look at the guys who came in to run AYR, who got thrown out a while ago, and the guy who came in to run State House, Ed Schmaltz, who was a nice guy who ran Patagonia.
Yeah.
I think you need somebody who understands the culture and the industry. There's a woman in California who runs a company called Gold Flora, whose name is Lori Holcomb, who I have an incredible amount of respect for. I think she's a really interesting balance of someone who understands business and understands the industry, and I'm rooting for her. We'll see how she does. I think she's got a tough hand, but somebody like that, I think, is an interesting person. Everyone probably knows that I have a pretty decent sized relationship and position with Glass House, and I think Graham Farrar is another person who is well respected in the industry, was a legacy grower for a long time, understood the tech business, and has parlayed that into probably the single largest greenhouse facility in cannabis on the planet, operating at a scale that no one could possibly have ever dreamed of. And so, when you look at things like that, there's a lot of possibility. But I think just another consumer products person coming in to turn around a company, we've seen that 6 or 7 times and it hasn't worked.
Right.
And why that, again, when you're an institutional investor, it's kind of like playing poker. There's a set of rules. Okay, well, I get this. This is what I should do. That's how kind of some investors work. And sometimes, those are just bad decisions. So I don't know.
Are you looking for a lasting, meaningful way to connect with your audience and highlight your brand? Well, listen up, because Planted with Sara is taking on new sponsors. Here's a powerful stat. 20% of listeners are more likely to support brands they hear about on a trusted podcast. And 60% actually look up that product after hearing about it. That's the power of podcasting. Planted with Sara Payan has a unique draw. With remarkable guests, we attract and engage audience that spans all sides of the cannabis spectrum. Picture your message reaching these listeners time and again. Podcast ads are evergreen, meaning your brand stays relevant as new audiences discover and binge past episodes. It's a long-term investment that keeps on giving. If you're looking for a targeted, passionate audience with lasting impact, the right listeners are here waiting to meet your brand. Visit plantedwithsara.com to get a copy of our sponsorship deck today.
Yeah, it always it throws me for a loop. But on the other hand, when I look at like the future of the industry, and like when we were talking about legalization here in California, one of the things that I used to say to people, especially when I was teaching at City College, I was like, listen, another great thing about legalization is that it's going to draw younger people into areas that they may not have ever thought were fascinating for school. Like, who knew that cannabis could possibly make supply chain management sexy? You know, and what's going to happen when we start to get the professionals that have those kind of chops and the passion for cannabis in the industry? Like, because when we look at where we are now, we are very nascent. We're in the very beginnings of everything. I mean, we've watched an enormous amount of change just in the past decade. What are your thoughts around that? Like, as we grow, like, what do you think we're going to see? Because here in California, we're dealing with some mass extinction events. We have been for like the past 3 years. And, you know, we're now hearing about, in the very near future, many retail locations being closed just for the simple fact that there are all these back taxes that are owed and the state's tired of paying, even though they created the problem.
So you're asking me about 6 questions there.
I know. Pick and choose, Seth. What one do you want to hit?
You're in an industry that, from a real capital markets perspective, is maybe only 10 years old.
Yeah.
And what happened in the first 3 or 4 years was you raised a lot of money, publicly and privately, in equity, based upon a set of assumptions that were mainly predicated on federal legalization and a bunch of other people coming in and buying us and increased valuations. So if, let's just say, in the first wave, $3 billion, and please, if anyone's listening, I want the number. I'll give you attribution. So anyone who's a research analyst out there, I want the aggregate amount of dollars that flowed into cannabis from 2010 to 2014, okay, or 2016. And let's just call it $3 trillion or $3 billion, okay? $1 billion publicly and $1 billion privately, and $1 billion somewhere else. None of that money's gotten a return. So if we go back to where I started and I'm the investor and this is my job, I'm going to take $100 million of your money and I'm going to return a certain amount of it and I'm going to get a fee on it. Why? Because then I'm going to go do it again. So if I've taken $100 million of money and I got a goose egg, I'm looking for a job. And if I'm an investor, that's an ego sandwich that I can't digest. So you have a whole bunch of people who, in the first 5 or 6 or 7 years of the industry, were the 800-pound gorillas and running around and, doing all these things and prognosticating. And about 96% of what they assumed failed because they just didn't get an exit. So now you're left with a landscape where you have a bunch of MSOs that may or may not have a flawed business model. I don't know. You have a bunch of pretty decent, viable private operators that seem to have pretty viable businesses. And you have a bunch of smaller people on a regional basis that have underwritten models which are probably never going to work. And unlimited license retail, or the way that California has gone about rolling out retail, is not probably long-term viable. When people initially came to me in the green rush around licenses, I said, I'm not really that interested in a license because I just don't know long term, 6, 8, 10 years, how much value that there's going to be. I think there's plenty of people who are successful in retail in California. I could see a future state 10 years from now where, the distribution of cannabis is bifurcated into, those that have licenses and gas stations and liquor stores.
Mm-hmm.
The entrance of hemp and Delta into the market has further truncated that supply chain. So, the first part of that question is, why are we in the state that we're in? It's really because the two spigots of public equity capital and private equity capital that was fueling all of this stuff got turned off because none of what those companies, or what 75% of what those companies promised, didn't deliver because no one got an exit. MedMen is probably like the front page story of that. But there's, as someone who's been in the industry, you probably could tell me 30 MedMen stories about a company that we've never heard of that's two people that have a delivery service in the Bay Area, right? So where is it? So you've had the first culling. You haven't had a full culling because you don't have a bankruptcy function in cannabis. And as a result of that, you don't have a tax enforcement mechanism at the state level. So in California, let's say 25 or 30% of the businesses that in any other industry would have been bankrupt and died perpetuate and stick around. So you have this recycle function that doesn't happen in other industries. Where's it going? Well, let me tell you why I'm involved in the industry.
Yeah.
Fair? Okay.
Yeah.
So from 2016 to 2030, you saw the global size of the market go from $6 billion to $32 billion. 2016 to 2023. Is it going to go to $160 billion in 2030? Is it going to go to $70 billion in 2030? I don't know, but I'm not stopping. Number one. Number two, I look at rec cannabis as just another CPG that is competing against other large CPGs for consumer share of wallet. So if I look at alcohol, tobacco, or pharma, cannabis spends almost as much, if not more, per consumer than all of those three verticals. Cannabis is smaller than all those three verticals and growing faster than all those three verticals. And adult penetration in the United States or in North America in cannabis is about 11%. If I look at alcohol, it's 55%. If I look at tobacco, it's 23%. If I look at pharma, it's about 35%. So you have an industry that's as big as 2 or 3 other industries. We spend as much as they do, and we have fewer customers, and we're growing faster than they are.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that tell me? What that tells me is if I look back and I'm educated and I look at all the things that I know, it tells me that what I see coming eventually is alcohol, tobacco, beverage, luxury, pharma, CPG, wellness, cosmetic, hedge funds, investment banks, venture capitalists throwing money at this industry when they can. Because what did we say before? Business is predicated on constant growth. So if I have a market that is 10 times smaller than alcohol globally, but it's growing 4 times faster than alcohol, and I have a market that's 3 times smaller than tobacco and is growing 12 times faster than tobacco, you tell me what's going to happen.
Well, yeah. And then you're looking at some of those like tobacco, liquor, pharma. They all have they all have dedicated shelf space already. So if they make a shift, they've got that shelf space in the mainstream.
We're fighting against them for the same consumer that they want to own.
Mm-hmm.
So why am I involved in the industry? That's why. Because I've said it before, I believe between now and 2030, you're going to have some inflection event in the US, whether that's Schedule 3 or safe banking or descheduling. I don't give a shit what it is. I don't know what it's going to be. But the moment that a plant touching company can list on NASDAQ, or the moment that Citibank accepts a plant touching deposit, forget it.
Yeah.
Forget it. The stupidity game is going to uh, and every single person that I've posted about or talked about or met is going to call me. That's why I'm in cannabis. Full stop. I've given money to cancer research. I donate money to religious organizations. I have supported and mentored people. I'm not in this for the medicine. Lost my mom to stage 4 cancer, lost my dad to heart disease, fund research in both of those areas. Okay. I'm in it because when the moment of that inflection occurring, I'm going to be in the middle of every possible transaction that I can be in order to make as much money as I possibly can at that moment. And then I am going to disappear. I'm going to take one of these cars and I'm going to drive off into the sunset. I'm going to throw my car out of the back, and you are never going to hear from me again. But that's why I'm here, and that's what I see. And what I've done is I've tried to preach that gospel to as many people that will listen. And allegedly, I have 36,500 acolytes that seem to want to listen to the hymnal of Seth. Whew, I'm really feeling it today. I'm so sorry. But that's why I'm here. And I think that opportunity is so great. And honestly, if I take, the bullshit meter off for a second, I've helped 20 people to exit companies before. And there are 3 management teams that I have done 2 exits for. Right. So when I look at skill sets in business, you want to know what a skill set that a lot of people do not have is? Exiting.
Yeah, people don't know when to jump.
It's not just that. The process, the cadence, the disillusionment, the hope, the decisions that have to be made, the constraints, the negotiations, the anxiety, all of it. We mentioned before we started, you're happily married. I'm happily divorced for 14 years.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm going to tell you what, though, going through that process sucks. Right. So it's kind of, if you've never been through it before, I've never given birth to a child. I don't know that I want to do that. So once you've done it, you can kind of be like, all right, I know how that's going to go. Well, if I've done it 20 times, and there aren't too many people in cannabis that have done it once, I think the reason that people want to talk to me is that I'm just going to honestly tell them what I think. And most of the people that do what I do go like this. Oh, okay, I'll talk to you now.
Right. Yeah.
In 2024, I looked at 24 term sheets for the financing of 9 companies. 4 of those term sheets that I had originated and generated and provided to somebody. Okay. The other 20 were people who called me and said, hey, I got this from these guys, and you know more about the market and these guys than anyone else. So can you tell me what you think? And I said, sure, in every instance. And that level of transparency and credibility and relationship is one of the things that you don't find in humanity these days. And when you find it in our industry, it's valued. And the reason that I continue to move forward in the way that I do is that it's about the transaction, sure, but it's also about the relationship and obtaining what I want without any expectation, right? Sure, I want to be the guy you call, but I'm not going to make you sign a contract that I'm the guy that you call.
Right.
But you're going to call me because when I fly to your event in Arizona next week, I'm the guy you actually want to have dinner with and hang out with and talk shop with,
Yeah.
right?
You must get a lot of people coming up to you asking for help and advice, and for people out there listening who are thinking, "Hey, I really want to talk to Seth and get his take on this." What's some advice that you would give them for approaching you about these things? Because you must be overloaded with requests.
Um, I think it depends how it manifests. I'm sorry, give me 1 second.
Sure.
I think it depends how it manifests. I'm going to run a post later this week, that talks about it depends how it manifests and who it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
What I will not do anymore is I will not just jump on a call. I'll tell you why. Not including DMs. So just talking about like organic text or email generated inbounds. I average about 800 inbounds a year. If I jumped on a call for an hour with everybody who sent me an inbound, and let's assume 8 hours in a day and 40 hours in a week, that's 5 months of me jumping on a call every single day. I don't got time for that.
Who does?
I don't. So, I have a couple of different methodologies via which I will screen things, and I will put them into buckets, and depending upon what bucket it gets put in, I will, with my team, decide how we're going to allocate time, because time is really the only thing that I have left, and it's the most valuable resource to me. So, if someone cold DMs me with a business plan and it's not amazing, the probability of me getting on the phone with them is pretty low. The probability I will answer everyone. So the probability of me responding with a polite, thank you so much, this isn't for me, is high. Occasionally I will get, a young person. The other day I got a DM from a kid who's, a senior in college in upstate New York who wants to break into the industry and doesn't know how to. I'll get on the phone with him for 15 minutes. But a guy who sends me a pitch deck at 4:30 on a Sunday afternoon and says, we need to talk Monday because Joey told me to call you and I need $500,000. That's probably not where I'm going. And do I have a relationship with you? If I do have a relationship with you, then the probability of me expending energy to talk to you is usually higher. At this point, to be kind of rude, I can probably tell within about 30 seconds to 3 minutes whether or not I can add any value to something, and if the person that is my counterparty is somebody that I actually want to work with, and can I make any money at it? And if I can't answer yes to all three of those pretty quickly, I'm out.
I don't think that's rude, though. I think that's just, knowing what's valuable for your time and also for the other person. I mean, what's the point otherwise? When you're looking at, okay, so I've been saying this for years, and the green nurse is dead. But do you think when we talk about the change, that time that you're holding out for, when whatever it ends up being, whether it's banking, end of 280E, what have you, where the money starts coming in and we start mainstreaming that, would you call that the true green rush?
No, I don't even think that's the beginning of the true green rush. Because again, let's just say, we haven't talked about politics, but let's just say President Orange decides that he's going to legalize. Someone in a thread today sent to me a message that Kennedy, has come out today or at some point and basically publicly said, I'm going to put cannabis on Schedule 1 and we're just going to tax it federally. I don't know if anyone else saw that, but
I haven't seen that yet.
I don't know if I don't know if it's just like, yoga babble or if it's real, but let's say that happens tomorrow. Okay. Think about the machinations that have to occur institutionally. Citicorp is not set up to accept bank accounts. So if that happens tomorrow, does that take 9 to 12 months to figure out how it rolls out? Yes. Are there people like public companies like a Trulieve and a GTI and a Verano and a Curaleaf that have shelf registrations sitting on NASDAQ ready to file tomorrow? Yeah. But when you start talking about people like the real controllers of dollars, like Unilever and like L'Oreal and like Pfizer and Novartis, they're not going to jump in immediately.
Yeah.
Or like, ABN or Coca-Cola. They're going to take their time. So I think when that moment of inflection occurs, you have a 12 to 18-month period of the first real wave. And then once you see what I call the battleships or the nuclear aircraft carriers start to come in, that's when the real fireworks occur. But I do think in that first wave, you'll see a lot of companies in play either go public or get acquired. And they're all the companies I've talked about, and that's what a lot of them are waiting for. And if I just want to talk about three that are, ready for that today, and Timeless and Grown Edibles and, Mammoth Distribution, and Levels Pro Tabs, although it's probably 2 tiers below in terms of revenue, and Aero Brands and Rove and Wild and Kiva, and don't get me going because I'm gonna have an aneurysm. But okay, what did I just mention? 8 of them,
Right. Yeah. 8.
and there's more. We could talk about my friends at Katan and Thunderstorm, right? And we could start talking about Can. Thank you, Nick Fasano. Want to know how I got in the industry? I'll tell you. Jason Pinsky called me one day. He said, I'm at ease. You got to meet this guy, Nick Fasano. 8 years later, I'm wearing a headset. Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Owen. That's why I'm here.
I love it. We could talk forever. I
could talk all day.
I would love to have you back and geek out on some things because there's so much for us to cover. There's so much in your head, and it's a pleasure. It's really it's a fascinating conversation, and you've seen a lot of business from a lot of different angles.
You want to ask me one final question or what?
What are you hopeful about in the future?
Wow, I'm hopeful to live a long time and for world peace. That's what I'm hopeful for. I'm 54. I'd love to live healthily till I'm 80, and I would like to not see a world war occur.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hopeful. As it relates to the industry, the first thing that I would honestly like to see is I would like to see every single human being who is incarcerated right now for doing what we are talking about doing in the last hour to be let out of jail. That's the very first thing I would like to see. I don't care about retribution. I don't care about compensation. Let them out of fucking jail.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I would like to see. And the second thing that I would like to see is I would like to see someone, and I do not care who it is, in the United States federal government figure out that they are sitting on a $32 billion industry, that they are not maximizing the tax value and the job creation value of, and figure out that there's a way to legalize this plant at the federal level and turn it into a $100 billion industry that can really help people and employ people and fuel the future. And that's what I'm hoping for. But someone in government's got to get a brain. and I don't care who you voted for in the last election. We've kind of illustrated that both sides don't have a brain for different reasons. So we'll see what the next 4 years hold. Hopefully, they're not going to take away our platform here of freedom of speech, but you never know. So
No, you don't. You don't. And that's why, everyone out there, remember, you got to vote. But there are people who out there that are trying to tell you your vote doesn't count. It does. It is your superpower. And when we're looking at whether it's our daily lives or, if in the cannabis industry, if you do not like the way it's being run, if you do not like the high cost of purchasing from a dispensary, you have a voice. The people out there who depend on your votes for their jobs, they need to see you. You are a highly functioning member of society. You pay taxes, you use cannabis, and you vote. Now use your voice.
vote.
Yeah.
Vote.
So for people who want to follow you on social media, how do they do that?
Well, I have a lot of stuff going on right now. You can always find me on LinkedIn. I post there every single day with a lot of, I guess, interesting content.
Yeah, it is. That's why
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you.
Well, thank you. I launched a YouTube channel yesterday. It's a very big deal because we've grown subscribers by 200% in a week. We've gone from 5 to 15. So I'm very excited about that.
Right on.
I have a newsletter, which we have finally finished. You could subscribe to the newsletter. There are actually 1,800 people that are subscribed to it who have never received one. So you're going to be happy to know that at the end of this month, the inaugural newsletter is coming out, and the newsletter will contain information which you otherwise will not get from me on my other channels. And if you go onto LinkedIn, you could subscribe to the newsletter very easily. Also, something which is very interesting, which we're dropping on Monday of next week, is that I have partnered with my friends at the Beard Brothers in order to create what we hope will be the definitive cannabis conference calendar. We are providing a free resource to everyone in the industry in one place. All we want is your email, and you can download an up-to-the-minute cannabis conference calendar with dates, locations, times, hyperlinks to the event, and special discounts to every event in the industry. We want to be the premier resource for knowledge relative to where to go and who to be with and who to be seen. So those 4 things. I also have a personally branded website called SethYak.com and my corporate website called Katan Associates. But everything is really driven off of the LinkedIn channel. And please subscribe to my YouTube if you're so interested in this year. Also, I am going to be speaking, I hope, at Hall of Flowers in March. I'm going to 2 beverage meetings in April, one in Chicago that's being put on by the folks at a group called Listen Ventures. And there's a non-cannabis guy in LA whose name is Danny Stepper, who's a huge player in the beverage industry, who puts on, I think it's called the Beverage Conference that I'm going to. But if you look at LinkedIn on Monday, you will be able to find the conference calendar download. And I think what we're also going to do is, as one of my featured offers on LinkedIn, that conference calendar will be available right there. But we want to try and make that the standard for everybody, because what happens to me is in November I start saying, okay, what am I doing next year? And no one knows where to go.
Right.
So I want to provide in one place between me and the Beard Brothers the definitive source of information for that question.
A little bird told me that was happening, so I'm glad you brought it up. I wanted to talk to you about it.
So Sara, I'm just sitting here doing nothing, ruminating ideas, expunging verbal diarrhea and seeing what occurs. I'm so grateful to you for having me as a guest. I really love your voice. I love your advocacy. I love your programming. and I love what you're doing for us. So if there's anything that I can do in the future to be helpful to you or any of the people around you, please let me know. If there's anyone who you think I should be talking about or meet, I would love to do that. And really just grateful for what you've done for so many people in the space. And from an education perspective, you're really, really out there winning hearts and minds. So thank you for that. I mean that.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And I definitely will. And I'm really, really looking forward to our future conversations because we have so much to dig into. So will you come back?
Let's get ready for round 2, baby.
Yes! Right on.
Yeah, I'll come back whenever you want.
Awesome. As I knock my mic in excitement. Awesome. Thank you so much, Seth.
My pleasure.
And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Pion on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher. Tune in. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.